Welcome back. Yes, the economy has recovered and the stock market is booming. Florida's unemployment is at a 10-year low at 4.1%. Many workers who lost their jobs during the economic collapse are working again, but in many cases, their new jobs don't pay as much as the ones that they lost. In South Sarasota County, that may be true as well, but here's another but. Two local companies, Tervis and PGT, are booming, and they are putting a premium on paying their employees a livable wage. What a concept! Joining us for more is Kevin Cooper of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce and Mark Gordon of the Business Observer and ABC7 South County reporter Christopher Brantley. Christopher, I think a lot of people did not know that there are companies this size in South Sarasota County and that so many millennials are there working at them.
Absolutely. Drive down I-75 and you pass right by them, you don't even know it. These are huge companies. PGT, nearly 2,000 employees. Tervis Tumbler, 700.
Mark, in terms of what you know about the local business economy, you know, there are a lot of businesses that are starting up. What is, in the big picture, the environment right now in South County in terms of the number of companies, and are they hiring, and are they hiring at wages that people can live on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of companies that are hiring in South Sarasota County. Right, the ones Christopher's talking about, right on those streets there, the Triangle Park and those roads right there. Several manufacturers are also hiring there. I think the wage is climbing up. I don't think the wages are climbing as rapidly as the jobs are being filled.
And Kevin, I've asked you about this often because, and I remember, you know, talking to your predecessor about it. When are wages going to start catching up to how businesses in general are doing? Are you seeing anything out there that will give people who are working but maybe earning less than they used to some hope?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at statistics out of the Bureau of Labor for the United States, you'll see that the last report that came out showed Sarasota County was the 27th fastest growing county in the United States for average weekly wage growth. We are 14th in the state of Florida. Now, the state of Florida, we are lower than the state of Florida, we're lower than the United States, but what we see going on here is a faster clip of average weekly wage growth for our workers. We are higher than Manatee County, we're higher than DeSoto County, and we're higher than Charlotte County. So there is promise. Again, there is some ground to make up. We are lower than the average in the state of Florida, we're lower than the average in the United States, but certainly there is promise on the horizon.
You know, Christopher, you mentioned something in your story, which you used to hear more about, but not so much in recent years, that I believe it was PGT that you said that they're starting a daycare for employees' children. That is something that a lot of companies cut back on when the economy tightened up.
But look at PGT's standpoint. 50% of their people have been there for more than 5 years. They want to keep those people. Those are people they have invested all kinds of training into to have the specific jobs that they have. By opening up that daycare, that just continues these people employment because they'll be happier in the long run.
Hey, Mark, do you know how many companies out there locally do offer that kind of assistance to employees?
I mean, there's definitely other companies of the same size that do that. I'd probably a handful. I don't think that's a significant amount, but at a certain size, you get to 500, 600, 700 employees. I think you have to start doing those kinds of things where you can retain these employees that Christopher was talking about. You've spent the money on training them, you want to keep them. So whether it's a cafeteria, gym, other kinds of perks, there's companies that do that.
You know, Kevin, isn't this about being competitive for workers, which are in some cases at a premium, that companies have to offer these kinds of benefits to employees, or they're not going to get them?
I don't think so, and I think it points to, when you look at employers like PGT and Tervis, it isn't, are they creating the right types of jobs here in Sarasota County? The real question is, how do we keep them creating jobs in Sarasota County for the next 100 years? Employers don't need to do these things. As the labor market tightens, the unemployment rate is lowering, you see competition for employees and wages start to increase, but these ancillary benefits, whether it be through health care, daycare, gym memberships, and other ancillary benefits, you don't see all companies doing those type of things because they don't have that critical mass.
Right, we are just getting warmed up here. We'll have much more on South County jobs coming up right after we check First Alert weather. Welcome back. We're talking about jobs and the livable wage on the Suncoast, specifically in South County. And joining us for more is Kevin Cooper of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce, Mark Gordon of the Business Observer, and ABC7 South County reporter Christopher Brantley. And before the break, we started talking about that some companies down there, PGT, I believe, is starting daycare for their employees. I don't think a lot of companies understand that it's not just the wages, it is the fact that many employees have to put their kids into daycare. What was your conversation with the company?
So I talked to the director of human resources, and I basically posed it to him saying, you don't need to do any of this. They don't need to have this cafeteria in their building. They don't need to build a daycare. They don't need to help their folks with financial assistance and all the things that they do. They don't need to do any of it, and they'd still have people knocking on the door because they pay, decently well for these jobs, and so many people need jobs. They said that it is cheaper and more affordable for them to have these daycares, to do all of this for their employees, than have constant turnaround coming into their business, constantly having to retrain folks.
Kevin, the obvious question is, why don't more companies do this? After all, I know so many families that have to make a calculation about whether or not both the husband and wife have to, one has to stay home because the cost of daycare does not make it worthwhile for both to work.
Yeah. For most families, child care is either the highest or second highest cost next to where they live. So it's a big factor, and I think what is able to motivate PGT and what is able to make it work is the critical mass of employees. From 2013 to today, PGT has added over 1,000 workers at the Venice location. So for them, having about 2,100 employees there allows for that critical mass where a $2 million investment makes it work, which creates more jobs, by the way, for people to actually service the daycare facilities. So for many employers that have 20 or fewer employees or 50 or fewer employees, the critical mass isn't there. That's not to say that employers can't get together and form a group to do those type of projects, but for one to do it, it's really challenging.
Mark, what are local companies telling you about hiring at this point, both in South County and elsewhere? Has the economy and profits increased significantly enough that the companies that have held back on their hiring for the last 10 years are finally doing so?
I definitely think so. I think there are companies that can't find the right employees, whether it's training or different kind of talent. You might have heard that from PGT or from Tervis, but I hear that all the time, that we want trained employees. We want to be able to hire employees that know how to do these kinds of jobs. And you definitely hear that also South County, really anywhere in Sarasota County, in home building, construction. I mean, there's a major labor shortage going on right now in terms of construction jobs. I mean, there's projects in downtown Sarasota that were delayed because they couldn't have enough workers to finish the projects that we've written about. Other publications have noted as well.
So what is the business community doing about that in order to at least attract qualified workers to come into the area? I guess construction is a whole other issue in terms of what you can do to attract workers to be here to build on all the developments going up.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. Some of the things we're talking about, wages are climbing because of that. Labor market is tight. It is a lot more competitive for employers to go find the employees. They are adding more benefits. They are making sure that the swath of things that they include isn't just about what the paycheck looks like. It's about the whole holistic benefit of being an employee at a certain company. And the ongoing challenge for us isn't necessarily wages. There's some outside things. I think Mark talked about the skills gap. In the United States, the average workforce participation rate is about 63%. In the state of Florida, it's 58%. In Sarasota, it's 50%. Half of our residents aren't in the workforce. We have a lot of retirees, so it's a big challenge for us to find those skilled workers when a lot of the people that live here simply aren't working for one reason or another. So, but I think to the question of wages, that actually benefits wages. It's tougher to find workers, tougher to find good labor. So the wages are climbing because of that.
Christopher, we focused on two companies mainly in your story, but what are you hearing about other companies in South County?
Well, you take a tourism business or a little tchotchke business, if you will, down on Venice Avenue. During the tourist season, I'm blanking on the name, but the Venice Stationers is the name of the business. They have sometimes half a dozen employees during season. It fluctuates quite a bit, and so it really is all about the time of year for a tourism business, but for something like this, for these manufacturing jobs, this is year-round. So, I mean, it really depends, depending on where you are in Venice.
There's been a lot of discussion over the past year about Governor Scott's efforts to fund the programs that attract businesses to Florida. He is still going out around the country trying to pilfer companies from elsewhere to come down here. But if the workforce is limited, is that money well spent to try to attract people, to companies to come down here?
No, I think it is to a certain extent, depending on how much money it is. As you've talked about, I've been on this show before. We've talked about some money that's been misspent from an economic development standpoint. So I think that's something to consider. But I definitely think it's a worthy investment to have an economic development office.
Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's valuable. I think one of the greatest benefits of this country is the mobility of the workforce. And especially with technology, people are finding they don't need to be anchored to where they were born. They can move all over the country to work. So when good jobs exist, people are willing to travel. People are willing to uproot their families and move there. So I think the attraction mechanisms and the money put towards that is very well spent.
We've also been talking on this broadcast a great deal over the last months about the efforts to fix health care, whether you believe in repealing and replacing Obamacare. But for those who are on employees insurance, what I often hear is the cost to employees are skyrocketing so much that limits in terms of what these companies can do in terms of offering raises to try to keep their employees.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to a certain thing, which is the fact that I think from a consumer mindset, people have an inflated sense of what net profit margins are for a lot of businesses. They really think businesses are making a lot more than they really are, and I think PGT is a publicly traded company. You can go look at their net profit margin, and you'll see it's not what I think some people would think it is. So as healthcare costs increase, it does make it a little more challenging at the end of the day. You have a finite pot of money to move around, and whether you move it into employee benefits or you move it into payroll, it is discretionary to you, but in a way, there's definitely an ebb and flow or a pull and tug there.
So, Mark, what is the near term and the longer term outlook of our local business community in terms of hiring and in terms of salaries?
I think it will continue to get better. As Kevin mentioned, the data points that way, that the salaries are catching up. I think home builders are continuing to build homes, and people need to buy those homes that they're building. I mean, you talk about South County, there's all the building going on in Venice, whether it's Neal Communities or 5 or 6 other builders that are building there. So I think there's going to continue to be more jobs in Sarasota, but in South County as well.
You talk about the West Villages is expanding at it seems like a daily rate. There's another 12.5 houses popping up. Those, expanding of the West Villages, creating potentially a shopping center right next to where the Braves Stadium is going to be built. I mean, that's a whole area that's nothing but grass right now. Come back in 10 years, it's going to be a booming metropolis.
Well, I think when we talk about wages and we talk about building, the piece here about the cost of living in Sarasota County, the one outlying factor that really pumps up the cost of living here is housing. And so when we look at the lack of multifamily and affordable housing in Sarasota County, that is really a forefront factor in what we do about attracting employees, attracting companies that come here that don't know how they're going to house their workers because they can't afford to live here. So the wages are there. The fact is we do not provide a continuum of housing for the continuum of wages that exist.
So what is the business community trying to do about that?
I mean, the sense is finding out what is the barrier. And so whether you look at a tax credit piece, whether you look at a zoning piece, what is the big barrier from affordable housing developments to come in? And I think in Sarasota County, what we have seen to a certain degree is that there has been a less than favorable focus on multifamily housing in this community. What we focus on is that housing is 4 walls and a roof. And we build it at very low density, and we do not have the density and the multifamily development that it takes to drive rents down. The supply simply is not there, and so the fight is to make sure that there is an ample supply for the demand for these workers.
And right out there, right off of Laurel Road and the Knights Trail area, right where PGT and Tervis Tumbler is, there's the perfect example of that is an affordable housing complex the city and several others would like to build, including PGT and Tervis Tumbler would like this affordable housing complex with nearly 500, I think it's 510 multifamily units to be built, literally within eyesight of both of these companies.
Because what we often hear in terms of whether you're a firefighter, a police officer, a teacher, in Sarasota, many of these folks are living more than an hour away from the area just simply because they cannot afford to live here. I would imagine that if you are having growing industry in South County, there's a better shot in terms of living and working in that community than...
Well, you think Northport. Northport is a relatively affordable place to live. And then you go to Venice and it's a little bit more expensive. Then you go to Sarasota and it's much more expensive. Then you go to Manatee County and it starts to go down a little bit. And that's why in the piece you heard Rogan Donnelly say that they have a lot of employees coming from Tampa, coming from the Northport area, even some in Fort Myers. These are all folks who are living farther away from where they work so that they can live comfortably and still work in this area.
And the fact of the matter is, from a business standpoint, the cost of land, the cost of regulation, none of that has any effect on the pro forma of a business or the net profit margin of a business and the sales of what they're doing. So from a business standpoint, the Nolan Gardens example that Chris was giving was a great example of Venice, Northport, the United Way, Tervis, PGT getting together, identifying the problem and trying to come to a solution. And the question is that going to fly? Is the model going to work? And I think and hope that it will, so that we can employ more projects like this in this area and really around the region.
And that kills two birds with one stone. That gives more housing out in that area, and it also helps with the affordable housing issue that we've talked about on this broadcast a dozen times.
Kevin mentioned tax credits. Is there something either the county commission can do, or are businesses trying to go to the state legislature and get those tax breaks to build more affordable housing to get the workers here?
I don't think it's more of a local thing. I think both Manatee and Sarasota County have had some issues in the past about sort of being the party of no when it comes to some of these density things that Kevin's talking about, very restrictive in certain ways, and I think it kind of ebbs and flows and just changed a little bit.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with final thoughts when we return. We're talking about job creation and livable wages in South County. Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So, Kevin, we focused on 2 companies tonight. How many other companies are out there that are almost in the position where they are going to start hiring in terms of large numbers and really going after, wages and offering these other kind of benefits that we've been talking about, including childcare?
I mean, I think everyone would be surprised. There's a lot of companies in Sarasota County that are of significant mass, that are doing a lot of hiring and then looking really about how to retain their talent, because the skills gap is strong, because they're having a hard time finding workers. So they're driving wages up because unemployment is down. So wages are tight. And I think, what we need to do, and I think we touched a lot about this in this conversation, is not ask, are these the type of jobs we want, but ask, how do these companies continue to create jobs here into the future? And I think there's a lot of things we need to do to focus on as a community, affordable housing being one of them, to make sure that the continuum is available for these continuum of the workers, because no matter what we do in places like PGT, where the average wage is 73% higher than the minimum wage, they're doing the right thing.
Mark, what are businesses telling you?
They're telling me that they definitely want to be hiring. They want more certainty from the government, whether it's state or especially federal, whether it's health. We talked a little bit about healthcare. They want more certainty about what Obamacare or whatever it's going to be. And what they need to pay their employees from that.
And Christopher, the 2 companies that you talked to, these are good times. What's the mood of the employees right now?
The mood of the employees is relatively happy. I mean, you walk down both factory floors and people are smiling in good moods. They're all being paid well. They're getting good benefits, and they are going to continue having their jobs.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Finally, it is that time of the year again, back to school, but some teachers spend hundreds of their own dollars on school supplies for our kids. And we asked you yesterday what you thought of teachers spending their own money in the classrooms and on students, and here's what you were saying. From Linda: it should be the parents' responsibility to send their child prepared for school, but in the event that she isn't, then yes, the school should reimburse the teachers for those supplies. Paula says, I am a retired teacher, and many years ago we were given plenty of money for our classrooms. However, as the years went by, our supply money dwindled to practically nothing, so we just learned to do without. And then there's Robert, who says, here's an idea: if you can't afford children, don't have children. It's not the taxpayers or the teacher's responsibility to provide for your children. Robert, did you ever stop to consider some of our friends and neighbors might now not be earning as much money as they used to? It's not right that teachers are spending their money on their own supplies, but do you presume to know why some families can't afford everything that they need for their kids? Consider that for a moment. If you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Kevin Cooper is with the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. Mark Gordon is of the Business Observer, and ABC7 South County reporter Christopher Brantley. When we return, we'll have a final look at your first alert weather. Plus, a memorial was held today for Heather Heyer, the victim from the rallies in Charlottesville. Stay with us.